Behind the polished bars and glowing lanterns of Harrison Avenue, the McKenna sisters' saloon had a reputation for refinement. Rare in Leadville, they did not shout, did not gamble openly, did not let fights spill across their floor. Instead, they promised music warmth and conversation. For miners with aching backs and frostbitten fingers, the sisters were seen almost as saints women who had carved a place of civility in a town that chewed people up. That illusion shattered the moment the sheriff pried up those floorboards. The notes pinned to the dresses were written in Margaret McKenna's precise hand. Each began with a woman's name, often Irish-German or Swedish, followed by height, hair color, and a number that matched the prices recorded in the saloon's hidden ledger. Some notes carried chilling additions: obedient, quiet, pregnant. These were not keepsakes. They were inventory. Testimony from miners and drifters later revealed whispers of women arriving on stagecoaches from Denver only to vanish within days. A handful of locals recalled seeing wagons depart in the dead of night, covered in canvas driven west toward the railroad line. Few questioned it then in a city where men died daily in cave-ins or gunfights. A missing face blended quickly into the chaos. But the folded clothing spoke louder than any witness. Every stitch, every button was proof that someone had lived, laughed, hoped, and then been reduced to a bundle beneath the floor. The sisters themselves became phantoms. No trace was ever found. No bodies in the hills, no sightings on the train. Manifests, not even rumors from San Francisco or Salt Lake, where so many trafficked women were sent. Some believed the McKennas fled with their profits. Others whispered they had been silenced by the very network they served their disappearance, a precaution against exposure. Yet the most unsettling theory came from the women of Leadville themselves. They spoke of a second basement below the saloon, a space never marked on the plans. Men swore they heard muffled cries under the music, the faint thud of boots on wood when no one danced above. When the authorities dug, they found only stone foundation. But even decades later, old miners would lower their voices when passing the empty lot, where the saloon once stood, saying the ground still held the sound of weeping. Upstairs, the sisters had created private rooms, advertised as boarding for respectable travelers. But in practice, they served a different purpose. Some were rented by the night, others by the week, and a few remained locked, their curtains drawn at all hours. Those who stayed long enough in Leadville whispered that men disappeared up the staircase and were not seen again until dawn, emerging pale, disoriented, and unwilling to speak of what had transpired. Margaret kept her records in a leather-bound book she never let out of sight. On its surface, the entries appeared ordinary lists of purchases, liquor orders, coal deliveries. But investigators later realized that subtle marks in the margins, small crosses, dots, and dashes functioned as a code. Crosses beside names of young women, dots near descriptions of miners who spoke no English, dashes where family connections were weak or absent. It was an index not of customers but of prospects. The saloon prospered, outwardly respectable, yet never lacking in business. What gave it away years later was the precision, too precise for mere coincidence. Women arriving on coaches often found themselves directed by chance, by circumstance, by a kindly suggestion to the McKenna establishment. Some stayed a night, others vanished. It was not until the winter of 1881, with the discovery beneath those floorboards that the facade collapsed. Each bundle of clothing, folded with almost reverent care, betrayed the truth the McKenna sisters had not simply been saloon keepers. They had been catalogers of lives, converting flesh into currency, their business ledger, written across both ink and bone. To this day, no clear answer explains their sudden disappearance. Some argue the sisters fled west, blending into San Francisco's labyrinth of brothels and boarding houses. Others believe they were eliminated by the very network they served, their silence purchased as thoroughly as the women they trafficked. Yet, among Leadville's oldest families, another story circulates in whispers that the mountain took them back. That beneath Harrison Avenue in the old stone foundations, the ground still remembers every name written on Margaret's lists, but Emma's letter turned darker with each page. On the fourth night of their stay, Anna was invited upstairs by Margaret herself. Emma recalled the way her younger sister hesitated, clutching the carpet bag as though it were a shield. Catherine had assured them it was merely to discuss opportunities, perhaps a position helping with the bookkeeping. Anna went willingly, comforted by Catherine's warmth and Margaret's soothing voice. She never returned. Emma wrote of how she waited until dawn, pacing the hallway, knocking on locked doors, only to be told by Catherine that Anna had already left a sudden opportunity in Denver, a chance too good to ignore. But Anna had left behind her shoes her mother's locket, and even the half-written letter she had been composing to a cousin in Chicago. Emma knew instantly this was a lie. The next days blurred into a nightmare. Catherine urged her to stay, promised her work, promised that Anna would send word. But Emma began noticing things, a faint metallic smell beneath the floorboards, the way certain doors stayed locked, the bundles of clothing carried out late at night under canvas loaded onto wagons. She described once hearing muffled sobs through the walls, abruptly silenced, as though by a hand pressed too tightly over a mouth. Emma's breaking point came when she discovered by accident a scrap of paper in Margaret's ledger, a page torn hastily perhaps by mistake. On it, Anna's name appeared, followed by her age, height, hair color, and a price. With what little strength she had left, Emma fled. She joined a caravan of freight haulers bound for Salt Lake City, eventually making her way to San Francisco, where she fell into the very nightmare she had tried to avoid, the Barbary Coast brothels. She escaped only after months of degradation, carrying nothing but the memory of her sister and the determination to see the truth exposed. Her letter ended with a plea. If the McKenna women are still in Leadville, then every girl who walks through their doors is in mortal danger. I beg you, look beneath their kindness. Look beneath the flaws. That is where you will find us all. Marshall Dugan folded the letter with trembling hands. Outside, the winter wind howled through Leadville's narrow streets, carrying with it the smoke of smelters and the scent of coal. He had no way of knowing then that Emma's warning would open the door to one of the most chilling discoveries in the history of the Rocky Mountains. For a long time, Dugan simply sat at his desk, the letter trembling in his calloused hands. He read Emma's words again and again, each detail pressing against memories he did not want to question. Catherine's easy laughter at town socials, Margaret's calm voice during winter epidemics, their saloon praised even in the Herald Democrat as a beacon of civility, Could it all have been a mask? If Emma's account was true, then the McKenna sisters were not angels of mercy, but traffickers hiding in plain sight, operating under the blessing of churchmen, newspapermen, and townsfolk alike. He stared out the frost-covered window of his office, watching miners shuffle down Harrison Avenue through the biting wind, and felt the weight of a terrible dilemma. To accuse the McKenna sisters without proof would risk his reputation and the fragile trust of the community. But to do nothing meant consigning more girls to disappearances like Anna's. That evening, Dugan carried the letter home in his coat. He showed it to his wife, Sarah, who read it silently, her face growing pale. When she finally spoke, her words were soft but firm. "Bill, I remember that soup. It was too good, too kind. No one gives without wanting something back." Dugan knew then that he had to act. But against women as careful, as respected, as calculating as the McKenna sisters, a frontal approach would fail. They had influence allies, and if Emma was right, a network that stretched far beyond Leadville. He began quietly visiting the freight depot under the pretense of routine inspection. He asked clerks about shipments bound for California, about wagons that had traveled at night, about cargo never listed on paper. He slipped questions into conversations. At saloons, listened for whispers about missing girls, about travelers who never made it past Leadville. The first crack appeared when a drunk prospector swore he'd seen bundles being loaded into a wagon behind the McKenna saloon one winter night. At first, Dugan thought it was just another wild Leadville tale, until the man, trembling, admitted he'd recognized a scrap of blue calico caught in the wagon wheel. The same calico dress his niece had worn before she vanished. Marshall Dugan closed his notebook slowly, the saloon's lamps flickering in his memory. He now carried Emma's letter like a stone in his chest. It was no longer a question of if the McKenna sisters were guilty. The only question left was how many graves would he uncover once he looked beneath their floors. At first, Patterson had thought nothing of it. A saloon that offered lodging to women might occasionally need the services of a discreet physician. But in hindsight, he recalled how strange those visits had been. The girls he examined always seemed nervous, their eyes darting to the door as if fearful of who might walk in. He noticed faint bruises on wrists, symptoms of fatigue and nausea inconsistent with their supposed ailments. Yet whenever he asked questions, Margaret hovered nearby, smiling faintly, humming under her breath and answering on the girls' behalf before they could speak for themselves. Taken alone, each testimony might have been dismissed as rumor or the half-formed suspicions of people who wanted to believe the best about the McKenna sisters. But together, when placed beside Emma Kowalski's letter, the picture became undeniable. Leadville was not merely home to two benevolent women who looked after the vulnerable. It was a hub, quiet, orderly, and carefully concealed of a network that stretched far beyond the town's borders. Marshall Dugan found himself haunted by details he had once overlooked. Catherine's sharp eyes scanning newcomers at church socials. The way Margaret always kept the upper rooms locked when guests were not present. Even the peculiar frequency with which freight wagons rolled out of Leadville under cover of night bound. Not for the mines or Denver, but farther west toward the passes that led to California. For days he carried the weight of his discovery in silence. To accuse the sisters openly could spark panic or worse, warn them. Yet each morning, when he opened the missing persons ledgers, the faces of those vanished girls seemed to stare back at him, demanding justice. One night, sitting alone in his office, lit only by a sputtering oil lamp, Dugan made a list. Names, ages, last sightings. Next to each, he marked a small cross where the McKenna Saloon had been mentioned. By the time he finished, there were more crosses than he could count without his eyes blurring. And then, as if fate itself wished to strip away his last doubts, a new report arrived. A miner's wife had gone to the marshal in tears. Her younger sister, a girl of 19, who had come from Missouri, only a week earlier had vanished after being seen entering the McKenna establishment 2 nights before. Her small trunk left in her boarding room still sat untouched at the foot of the bed. For Dugan, it was the breaking point. He could no longer content himself with quiet inquiries and whispered testimonies. The noose was tightening, and if he delayed much longer, another girl would vanish into the west and never return. Morrison had been skeptical of that explanation. In her years of training, she had never heard of a sleepwalker methodically packing trunks, carrying them away, and then forgetting the event entirely. Clara herself had been bewildered, insisting she had no memory of leaving her room and that she would never abandon her mother's Bible under any circumstances. What struck Dr. Morrison most was the girl's terror, an instinctive fear that seemed to flicker just beneath her dazed confusion. It was not an isolated case. In her journals, Morrison described 3 other young women who had shown similar symptoms: sudden, unexplained fatigue after meals at the McKenna Saloon blackouts lasting many hours, memory gaps, and missing possessions. Each case followed the same rough pattern: hospitality, food, drink, drowsiness, and then disappearance. But Clara Ara had been different. For reasons Morrison never fully understood, the girl had reappeared before she could be spirited away, staggering back into Leadville streets half-conscious and robbed of nearly everything she owned. It was that anomaly which allowed Morrison to see the shadow of a larger design. When Morrison compared her private records against the marshal's list of missing women, the overlap was undeniable. Symptoms, locations, dates, they aligned with terrifying precision. She brought her journals to Dugan. One stormy November evening, the pages smudged with ink from her hurried hand. "Marshal," she said quietly, placing the heavy book on his desk. "I believe this is not coincidence. What you're looking at is not just bad luck or runaway girls. It is a systematic pattern of abduction. And I fear the McKenna sisters are not working alone." Dugan flipped through the pages slowly. Each neat, careful entry struck him like a hammer. The name, the symptoms, the missing belongings, the same refrain of sleepiness after supper. He remembered Emma's desperate plea, the missing person, reports, the hushed gossip of business owners, and now the testimony of a physician who had risked her own reputation to record what others ignored. For the first time, the marshal felt the web tightening, not just around the victims, but around Leadville itself. This was no mere rumor to be dismissed. It was a conspiracy woven into the fabric of the town, hidden behind lace curtains and warm smiles. Dugan leaned back, his face drawn in the lamplight. "Dr. Morrison," he said hoarsely, "if what you've written here is true, then Leadville is sitting on a powder keg. And if I make one wrong move, the sisters will vanish before I can lay a hand on them." Morrison nodded gravely. "Then you must move carefully. but you must move soon. These women are predators, Marshal, and they already have their next victim." The more Dugan read, the clearer it became that the sisters had constructed not just a saloon but an institution. They were untouchable, not because people thought them innocent, but because Leadville needed them to be innocent. To accuse them was to accuse the town's own claim to respectability. Behind closed doors, businessmen toasted Catherine as a lady of refinement in a rough land, while preachers praised Margaret's Sunday donations as proof that God's work could be done even in a mining camp. Each coin in the collection plate, each handshake with a silver baron had been another thread in the shield of influence that now stood between the sisters and the law. Dugan's position was perilous. He had eyewitness testimony, the physician's meticulous records, even survivors who bore the scars of captivity. But if he moved publicly, without an unassailable case, the town's most powerful men would crush the investigation to protect their own reputations. Late one evening, Dr. Morrison spoke the words he had been avoiding. "Marshal," she said softly, "you will not convict them with evidence alone. You must catch them in the act. Nothing less will force the town to believe." Her suggestion chilled him. To bathe the McKenna sisters meant sacrificing another woman or appearing to. It would mean placing someone in mortal danger under their roof, waiting for the sisters to reveal their methods. And if he miscalculated, the victim would vanish forever. For days he wrestled with the plan, pacing his small office until his boots wore lines in the floorboards. Each morning, another family came with questions about a missing daughter. Each night, he stared at Morrison's careful script, describing Bruce's blackouts and terror. By February 1881, the decision was made for him. A new arrival in Leadville. Eleanor Price, aged 20, had come from Missouri to work as a schoolteacher. Dugan heard her name whispered in the same places where other vanished women had last been seen: boarding houses, church socials, and finally, in the doorway of the McKenna saloon. The clock was ticking. Either Dugan acted now or Eleanor Price would become another entry in the long, grim ledger of the missing. Anna's account was meticulous. She remembered names spoken by guards when they thought the women were too broken to listen. The layout of safe houses where she had been locked in rooms that smelled of straw and laudanum, and the rhythm of travel 3 days by wagon. 2 days hidden, then another shift westward. She even recalled the face of a man who handled their transfers in Denver, a respectable hotelier by day, who turned his carriage business into a pipeline for human cargo at night. For Dugan, it was the missing piece. With Anna's testimony, the pattern became undeniable. The disappearances in Leadville were not isolated tragedies but links in a chain stretching across the continent. What chilled him most was Anna's insistence that the sisters were not merely participants, they were organizers. Catherine, with her business savvy, arranged debts and papers. Margaret, with her soft voice and church connections, lured victims with false promises of work or family introductions. But Anna's presence was a double-edged sword. If word spread that one of their victims had returned, the sisters might bolt before he could move. Worse still, the powerful men who profited directly or indirectly from the McKenna enterprise would not hesitate to silence her to protect themselves. Dugan found himself making an oath he had never spoken aloud in 20 years of service. He promised Anna that she would not vanish again, not into the wilderness, not into some back alley of San Francisco, and not into an unmarked grave. If it meant staking his career, even his life, he would use her testimony to bring the sisters down. But to do that, he needed more than stories. He needed a trap. And for the first time, Anna did not flinch when he suggested it. "Marshall," she said, her voice like steel scraped across stone. "I know what they look for. I can play the part. Let them believe they've found another girl to sell. And when they reach for me..." She leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You'll be waiting." Whispers spread faster than fire in a pine forest. By March of 1881, the people of Leadville were speaking the sisters' names in hushed tones. Some claimed the McKennas were preparing to sell the saloon and leave for Denver. Others whispered of a wagon seen behind their establishment, late at night covered with tarps and guarded by men whose faces were unfamiliar. Marshall Dugan noticed the shift immediately. The sisters' caution was not that of innocent women fearing gossip. It was the practiced paranoia of criminals who sensed the noose tightening. He realized that if he didn't act soon, the trail could vanish forever. Anna, meanwhile, burned with restless fury. She begged Dugan to let her confront Catherine and Margaret in public, to expose them before the entire town. "They took everything from me," she hissed one evening, her hands gripping the arms of her chair so tightly, her knuckles turned white. "My sister, my life, my future. I won't hide in the shadows while they drink and smile and plot their next victim." Dugan tried to reason with her. "You've survived hell, Anna. Don't throw yourself back into it. If you rush them, they'll turn the town against you, or worse, you'll end up in a grave before justice is served." But even as he spoke, he feared she was right about one thing. Leadville's people would never believe whispers alone. They needed undeniable proof, the kind found only in Margaret's locked cabinet. That night, while snow fell in thick silence over Harrison Avenue, Dugan made his decision. He would no longer wait for the sisters to make a mistake. With Anna's knowledge of the saloon's layout and the cabinet's location, he began to plan an operation that would either bring the McKennas down or end his career in disgrace. What neither he nor Anna realized was that Catherine, ever the sharper of the two, had already guessed that someone was watching. And Catherine McKenna had no intention of being taken alive. The silence that followed Catherine's words was suffocating. For a moment, no one moved. Glasses of whiskey trembled in men's hands. Chairs creaked as patrons leaned forward, straining to hear if this could truly be happening. Anna's voice cut through the haze. "You call it business, I call it murder. And tonight, everyone here has heard the truth." Catherine smiled thinly, a predator's smile. "Yes, they've heard it. But do you really think they'll stand against us, against the coin we bring to this town, against the men who protect us?" As if on cue, one of the armed transporters shifted his coat, revealing the cold gleam of a revolver. The room stiffened. Margaret, pale and trembling, clutched at her sister's arm, whispering frantic words that no one else could hear. Then, the batwing doors burst open. The March wind howled in, and with it came Marshall Dugan's revolver, already drawn. His eyes swept the room, taking in Anna's defiant stance, the armed men, and Catherine's icy composure. "Enough," he barked, his voice ringing like iron on stone. "This ends tonight. The standoff crystallized in an instant. Anna clutching her satchel of evidence, the sisters flanked by their thugs, Dugan at the threshold with the law at his back, and a saloon full of witnesses caught between fear and fury. Somewhere outside, church bells tolled the hour. Inside, the first shot was about to be fired. The conversation never reached its end, because at that very moment, the doors of the saloon crashed open and Marshal Dugan with his deputies stormed in. They had been watching, waiting, and when they saw armed men slip inside, they knew something was about to ignite. What followed lasted only minutes, but for those inside, it stretched into eternity. The smoke of gunpowder filled the air. Tables splintered. Glass shattered. The sharp crack of pistols echoed beneath the low ceiling. Two of the McKenna's men were the first to fall, their bodies twisting into the sawdust as blood spread across the floorboards. Anna, standing in the open, cried out when a bullet tore through her shoulder. She staggered, clutching the satchel of evidence she had carried so far. It was Deputy James Crawford who saved her life, cutting down her attacker with a single, merciless shot. Then chaos. Screams. A woman's voice shrill above the roar. Margaret McKenna lunged for a cabinet, the very one that held their records. But in the haze, Deputy Thomas Riley saw only a figure reaching for a weapon. His bullet struck her down. She died on that saloon floor, clutching not a gun, but a simple iron key. And Catherine slipped away like smoke. Through a hidden back door, down alleys she had memorized into the night. Dugan's men searched for days. Posters spread from Denver to San Francisco. Some swore she was seen in Salt Lake. Others whispered of her in Mexico. But Catherine McKenna dissolved into the wilderness of the West and into legend. When lawmen tore apart the saloon in the days that followed, they found things darker than anyone dared imagine. Beneath the floorboards, personal effects of dozens of missing women. Ledgers, receipts, maps. A record of a business cold and systematic. 47 young women sold their bodies, turned to profit worth $15,000, more than most honest men could earn in a lifetime. And in Margaret's private quarters, photographs. Images of girls unconscious, afraid, broken. Not for business, not for ransom, but as trophies. A cruel diary of suffering she had chosen to keep, preserved in ink and shadow. The revelations shook Colorado to its core. The McKenna sisters had not been lone predators. They were part of something larger, an enterprise stretching across 6 states with safe houses, transport routes, and men bought to look the other way. Arrests came in Denver, Salt Lake, San Francisco. A web was pulled apart, but its queen was still missing. Anna Kowalski lived, though the bullet in her shoulder would never let her forget. She became a voice for the voiceless, testifying before lawmakers, demanding laws that could pierce the darkness that had once swallowed her. Dr. Helena Morrison, too, left her mark, her medical records, proving what so many refused to believe. And Marshal Dugan, he carried the hunt for Catherine with him until the end of his days. He never stopped chasing shadows. The case forced a reckoning on the frontier. Churches formed safe networks for women. Lawmen changed how they searched for the missing. Communities learned a bitter truth that evil does not always wear a scowl or carry a pistol. Sometimes it smiles, offers a meal, and promises safety. And so, the McKenna sisters remain a ghost in Colorado's history. One dead on the floor of her own saloon. One vanished her face. On yellowing posters, her name whispered but never answered. Even now, some wonder, was everything revealed that night? Or are there still secrets buried beneath the mountains, waiting silent in the dark?